popped the champagne. Like I said, the stocks were up like 100 and some odd %, like Crazyville. So everybody loves sugar. Why wouldn't we like it?
Yeah, 40B or 39.9 rounding top line, everyone loves it, right? The geeks were going to drill down into what it actually means and unfunded versus requested.
From the Defense and Aerospace Report, this is the DownLink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defense. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. On Friday, Wall Street opened by shedding value. Traders are reacting negatively to President Donald Trump's latest tariff announcement. The evening before, Trump posted a letter to Canada's Prime Minister on a social media platform. The message? All Canadian goods imported to the U.S. would be slapped with a 35% import tax starting in August. We've been here before. It's anyone's guess how that pronouncement will really play out. But today's sentiment is a snapshot in time. It's not really indicative of the last quarter or how the first half of the year has finished. But how can we forget February and the S&P 500? We can't. Investors got hurt. It was a drama that lasted right through April, a 25% peak to trough sell-off in stock. But have you taken a look recently? The S&P 500 and the other U.S. indices bounced back and have notched new high records. Most of the major economic indicators like unemployment or inflation, they've remained in a steady state. The space sector is different, however. What we're witnessing is a renewed interest, maybe even passion, from tech investors, especially in the public markets. And that's coupled with a possible $40 billion top line for the U.S. Space Force budget for 2026. And there's tens of billions of federal dollars for Golden Dome, also known as Next Generation Missile Defense. Space systems will play an outsized role in that effort. This episode's guests are the DownLink's space investment, finance, and economy dynamic duo, Chris Quilty and George Pullen. They say it's time to pop the champagne. Is it? Here's our conversation. Hey, Chris, George, welcome back to the podcast.
Howdy, it's great to be back, Laura.
Same, Laura. Great to be back again this year.
So we have quite a bit to talk about at the end of the second quarter, the beginning of the second half of the year. So let's get through these introductions. Chris, want to kick this off?
Yeah, thanks. Chris Quilty. I'm the CEO of Quilty Space. I have been writing financial research on space industry since the early 2000s. Worked for 20 years with Raymond James as a sell-side analyst, and we do it independently now.
And George?
Sure. Great to be back as always. My name is George Pullen. I'm a space economist. I am the co-founder and chief economist of MilkyWayEconomy. We are a fifth industrial revolution think tank. The fifth industrial revolution is, of course, the space economy, which will be worth upwards of $4 trillion by the 2040s and $10 trillion by the 2050s. We make investments in small and medium-sized companies. We sit on some of their boards and also do some consulting work in the same space.
And I'm just going to have to go back on you on that fifth industrial revolution, my friend, because you have said how much it's valued at, but what is it?
Sure. So essentially, as the space industry allows for more and more productive economic activity in space, we are opening up an entire new continent's worth of businesses, services, and as that occurs, we're going to have what I believe to be another industrial revolution, right? Many will argue that we're currently in the fourth, but that'll open up this fifth industrial revolution, which will be the industrialization of space.
Thank you so much for that. And just would like to give a shout out. The Cosmic Consortium has a new video documentary on in-space assembly and manufacturing, which is exactly what George is just talking about. It's a brand new video. And I have not watched it yet, but I do trust the people that are behind it. So everybody should go take a look and, see how good it really is. Does it really show that there is a possibility for a space economy in space, as in nothing to do with the Terran surface? So, George, let's set the table for us to understand the state of play for the space economy. It'd be great to have an understanding of the state of the national economy. It's confusing, to say the least. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says unemployment is sticking at around 4%. Inflation is at 2.8%. That's minus food and energy prices. And the federal bond yields are still making an inverted yield curve, with a 6-month note yielding around 4.3%, and a 30-year note is at almost 5%. The Fed has not lowered its lending rate since December. So what's the state of play here for the national economy, and how does that affect the space economy?
Sure. So I would add a couple of other data points, because obviously as an economist, I'm going to add a couple more data points. S&P 500 broad-based index, we are relatively flat, maybe a slightly positive, but relatively flat for the year. Interest rates are, drumroll, unchanged. They're flat for the year. One of the interesting bits of data, though, is all around labor productivity. Historically, the labor productivity increases about 2% clip, a little bit less than inflation. But labor force productivity, especially for non-farm payroll, it was actually down in Q1, which is really weird, because then when you drill down into manufacturing and durable manufacturing productivity, it was super elevated. It was like 7. I got my notes here somewhere, but it was like 4.4 for manufacturing, and then durables was like 7.2. So this is all Bureau of Labor Statistics. Fantastic place to get all the economic data you could ever want. But what this means is, and I'm just going to say it, not that I told you so, but I'm just going to say it. When I said we should all maybe take a deep breath back last time we were together in late April, guess what? That's all we had to do. We're flat. We're still all talking about what tariffs may or may not happen and what might or might not happen for deals.
Or when they'll happen.
Or when or if. Interest rates haven't changed. Everything's pretty much the same as it was. And I think the market reflects that, right? That's why it's been relatively flat. And so I think what that does to the space industry and how that impacts the future space economy is that the capital that's seeking deals is still available. It is still scared. But as the year goes on, people have a natural deployment cycle. And as you leave Q1 and get into Q2 and now get to where we are now and here in July, people really do need to start writing checks in many cases. And so I think particularly for where I focus, right, different end of the ecosystem from Chris, which is always why I love when you have us tag team, the small and the mids, we're seeing checks, right? We're seeing some activities. And I think that's because it has been steady as she goes, uncertainty continues, but everything's relatively flat.
Interesting. And Chris, what's the state of the market, starting with the publicly traded markets for space companies, right? Voyager went public on June 10th with an IPO that raised $382.8 million off of a price of $31 per share. It's trading at around $39, $40 this week, I believe. Voyager got a market cap of $2.6 billion. So someone thinks that public market investors are keen. Chris?
Yeah. So I think when we first chatted at the start of the year, I said that I've been covering this industry for 20 years, and coming into 2025, I felt like more positive than I had, in any time in my career. Then January 20th happened, and the Trump tariffs and the economy moving sideways. And I was kind of regretting, making that call. But lo and behold, we just ran the numbers here for the end of the second quarter. So, half year results. And, if the S&P 500 or the Russell 2000 indexes were up, say, 5 to 15%, our core satellite and space companies that we have, about 15 companies, was up 132%. And our frontier space index, which is about another dozen companies, was up about 80%. That's crazyville. And, if you want some examples of where those numbers come from, Just in the year over year performance, we've got 6 companies that are up 2 to 3 fold. Avio, Redwire, Black Sky, MDA, Telesat, and Ovzon. Got 3 companies that were up 3 to 4x. That's Planet Labs, Satellogic, and AST. And Rocket Lab wins the prize, up 7.5 fold. So public markets have been eating up the space industry. I think that's both, again, the defense tech tilt in investing. You're seeing the stepped up defense spending in Europe with the 5% commitment of GDP. All of that has played very well for the defense sector.
And also the European Union has set aside a big, huge chunk of money. I can't remember exactly what the number is, but it is not small for defense.
Yeah. When you look at the private markets, venture capital, if you remember the setup here back in 21, 22, when we had the big SPAC bubble and whatnot, the venture capital industry boomed. We've been in the woods for about 3 years now, had seen some signs of life in the industry. And, lo and behold, now we've had 3 straight quarters of, year-over-year fundraising, second quarter. And that's just sort of on a global funding basis, keeping in mind that anytime you hear those global numbers, almost half of it is AI, right? It's overwhelmingly driving the scale of the funding. But, if you kind of drill down at least into the space industry numbers that we track, there were about 14 capital raises in the quarter, which is about, on average, trailing 12 months, I think about a dozen. But this was the best quarter, we've seen. I think second best quarter, again, going back to the SPAC days. We had Impulse Space, did a monster 300 million Series C. ISAR did a 150 million euro convertible note, and had a couple companies in Zona Space, which is GPS, 72 million, and Nominal on the software side, 75 million. The other interesting footnote there, as you noted, Laura, this was Europe's second best quarter for a capital raise since November of 24, had about 240 million raised in the quarter. So, the one area of the market in the private side that really hasn't come to life yet is the private equity side. Still seeing that frozen up in large part, but I think it's dependent upon interest rates and the IPO window opening to see some more movement on the private equity side.
I think too, there's such a wealth of good news that I might have missed it if you already said it, but I'll repeat it, if only to get invited back to their amazing party at Symposium. But Redwire had their $200 million announcement, right, for their additional offering. And what happened after that? The stock just decided to go up again. So, the markets are really loving space companies right now.
They are. And why do we think that is? I mean, is that the Golden Dome effect? Is that because people are just in a good mood and they went to Space Symposium and had a few drinks at altitude? I mean, what's going on, right? What's the underlying thing? Because this is real adult money. So, included with the drinks at the Redwire party at altitude, there really is some adult and sober thinking behind this, right? This isn't just FOMO.
No, I wouldn't say it's not FOMO alone.
And FOMO is just because I used an acronym and somebody should explain it.
You're the one who has the no acronym bingo rule. FOMO is fear of missing out, made popular, of course, from my legacy industry, blockchain and crypto. So FOMO is fear of missing out. I think that really, especially to kind of echo something Chris said, is, a lot of the analysts right now are seeing upwards of $1 billion, that's $1 billion a day going into AI investments. And at a certain point, probably yesterday, it's probably in the rearview mirror, at a certain point, the evaluations don't make sense anymore, right? You can only shove $1 billion a day into anything until it becomes too expensive. Even something as miraculous as the T2000. And so if that is the case, but I am looking for, first of its kind technologies, tip of the spear, deep tech, and I'm now here and interested, and I look around the area.
What's a
of deep
lateral
tech,
that's connected?
What's something else that could be next, right? And now where to put that money? Well, I mean, quite frankly, the answer is space, and I think people are coming to that conclusion. And I think something else Chris said that's also interesting to look at is, as mentioned, interest rates have remained flat, right? If we see interest rates come down, even just a skosh, we're going to see the PE activity pick back up. And I believe that PE activity that picks back up will also reflect this trend of people looking around AI, realizing it's perhaps mispriced and coming over to something else that's deep tech like space.
So now to the fun part. What do you think is the biggest and strategic space, finance, and investment story that has happened in Q2 or even in the first half of the year? Are Starship's rapid unscheduled disassemblies, the explosions important, or the Trump-Musk bromance breakup? Or how about the president's budget request for the U.S. Space Force? Or perhaps it's something else. Chris, have at it.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, it's hard to pick a single one. I came with a list thinking I could pare it down, but one thing that's often overlooked is Amazon, right? They have now gotten a couple launches going. They're going to start to become a presence. You're already seeing them start to make a impact with the channel partners and that are starting to plan out their strategies to how to work with Amazon instead of Starlink, perhaps down the road. There's lots of things going on the regulatory front. The Charlie Ergen showdown at EchoStar, certainly pretty high profile. And
you got to explain what that is, though.
Oh, goodness.
Real quick, come on. Get one paragraph. What's it about? What's the spice?
The issue is that EchoStar holds very valuable spectrum, 2 gigahertz spectrum, which they have held for a very long time, which SpaceX is attempting to get access to by opening up access through the FCC. So there is a showdown going between the FCC regulator and EchoStar. They threatened to did not make an interest payment, which sets them on the course to bankruptcy. So this was a pretty high profile standoff. Trump even tweeted about it, that Brendan Carr, the chairman, should get together with Ergen and work it out. And we're still working it out, right? So that one isn't done yet.
And George was wagging his head. So come on, George, jump in.
I think it shows the level that these discussions are at when, quite frankly, the president's even tweeting about it, right? Like this is a very consequential move in the markets. And, I think Chris is rightly highlighting it because as this develops, we will know a lot more in the next few months about this.
But what's strategic about that, really? There are lots of things that move the markets and then the markets move back, right? We've seen this, but this is a much bigger deal. This is using the levers of government to pry spectrum
right
to somebody else, right? So this is it hasn't really ever happened this way before.
If I was going to translate it to an audience member who maybe only occasionally listens to space, I would say this is almost like an eminent domain play that you've probably seen in your local town where some farmer is told, hey, that's interesting that this has been your family for 5 generations, but we really need it for the new soccer stadium. It's getting close to something like that in its discussions. And the reason it's important is we're all insiders. We'll say things like, the spectrum and what can they do with it. Let's just really break it down. The only reason we launch things is to have the satellites, the birds up there to collect data. And the only way we get that data back down is with spectrum. So and
spectrum is radio signals.
That's right.
Right. And it's kind of like there are many. And if you think about radio signals in terms of, let's say, pipes, right? So the pipe that's, going through this farm that's been in a family for 5 generations, if you take the farm, you take the pipes that are just below the ground, right? So that eminent domain would therefore then take the ground and therefore the pipe, and that's your spectrum. So, but it's a really weird way of going about it, though, is it not?
It is. I think, and just to sort of answer your question, why it relates, I think also for me, my my list, it has to be Golden Dome, and it has to be the coordination, the technologies around Golden Dome, which are going to include spectrum, and how we decide to allocate that, how we decide that, what parts of that do we need, especially when we're talking about, things that might be put up there originally for one intent, but now have to do another, right? AKA dual use. I think things get really complicated really quickly. And if you combine that with the amount of money Golden Dome has talked about, right? Not just in reconciliation, the first 25B, but the next 175B over the next 3 years, this is real money, right? Every one of those.
And whoever's got the spectrum is going to have a piece of that for sure, because you need the radio signals. All right, moving on. George, what's yours? What's that strategic story that stood out for you in Q2 or in the first half of this year? Why is it strategic? Why should we care?
Yeah, I think the space industry as a whole is very much following the evolving bromance to breakup of Musk and President Trump. I think everyone's following it, right? Even if they're not going to say it on a podcast because they're worried about something. I made my money in Bitcoin. I'll say whatever I want. I'm worried about it, right? Everyone should be worried about it. And I think that if you're not paying attention to that, you're either lying to your friends and family or you're fooling yourself. It matters a lot for our industry. I think to go back to the positives,
matters a lot also for our defense. And let's actually break that out. I mean, what's at stake?
Well, right.
Just to put it into focus.
Let's just identify the two easiest things, right? The two easiest things are launch and Starlink, right? So Starlink has demonstrated its criticality in the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that's pretty much all I need to say there, right? Starlink is obviously very valuable there. And then in terms of launch, in terms of rapid, reusable, reliable, the cadence is right. SpaceX has that advantage, and so ULA has got Vulcan rated. That's awesome, right? Firefly had new money come in, which is going to help them with their progress to. I know they renamed MLV, but I think it's something different name now. And then you've got Rocket Lab, right? But they're not on the same cadence,
and they also can't take up the same tonnage either.
Right. There's different payloads and fairing to consider and everything else, but
and there's also the small little problem of being human rated. Just saying, because and this is just before we actually started recording today, we were talking about the International Space Station.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I mean, that is the ride to the International Space Station, unless we want to, go up to the space station using Russian broomsticks. And
right,
I think
CST could get rated again, or have its rating finished. I'm not sure how you want to word that one. I'll let someone smarter than me say the right words there. But CST could get rated or re-rated, put on top of ULA, right? That's already paid and scheduled out for at least another, 3 or 4, I think is what Uncle Sam has contracted. So there is another pathway, but that pathway is more expensive than, SpaceX and Dragon. It just is.
Actually, there isn't an option. So this is all a silly discussion because they're a national asset, and it's in one way or another, SpaceX will launch when the government wants them to launch, and the government needs them to launch. So however that happens.
Right. So the question is SpaceX Air France for us?
Right. Which is a national or nationalized transportation company, right?
No.
Okay, well, why not, Chris? Go on. I mean, you're moaning the no
for tons of legal and other reasons. No, it's.
What's? I mean, legal. Okay, but beyond the legal part, there's something that's a bit intrinsic about this, because we are a democratic, free market, capitalistic society. Nationalizing something like this would seem to be pretty un-American, just to its brass tacks of what this is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we found Chris without words. I don't know how I'm going to edit around this. Oh my gosh.
Trying to figure out
You dug that hole, man, yourself.
I just don't want to go down the conspiracy rabbit hole. What if the government takes them over?
Let's not go down the conspiracy rabbit hole, and let's definitely not go down the what ifs. Plus, I already did that podcast anyhow. And that was not so long ago. That was at the beginning of the bromance bust up. But I do have something that I would like you to comment on, Chris, just so that I can give you the chance to regain your composure. Right. Yeah. The Starship's misadventures give folks pause. As you have said on this podcast, many have based their business cases on that launch and transportation vehicle. What's going on there? What do we have to pay attention to there? At least I pay much closer attention since you said that on this podcast.
January 2026. I mean, that's when they say they're going to be flying regularly. I mean, that's at least the latest I've heard. It's 6 months out here. So how they get from here to there, I don't know. It's not typical of them to make their start dates. So I'm not holding them to it. But, clearly they think they've got a path, even with the recent string of failures, to get to where they need to be with a confident design in the vehicle that they can start scaling up. And, talking with them recently, they still have a target of building 1,000 Starships, right?
And why do they need Starship, though, by January 1st, 2026? Because I'm not sure that's actually really clear to everybody. I mean, there is actually a functional reason why Starship really needs to start flying besides being massive and really fun to watch. And the chopsticks are great. They are. I mean, who doesn't like watching them? I can keep watching that video over and over again. It really is magic. But there is a functional reason why SpaceX really needs Starship to work.
Well, absolutely. They can't launch their third generation Starlink satellites until they get Starship flying.
And why is that?
Because they designed a satellite that is so big it won't even fit in the fairing of the Falcon 9. So that design is done, and the satellite itself will have 10 times more throughput than their legacy design. So an order of magnitude more, right? Think of what that does for how many more subscribers they can sign up, because they got people in a lot of regions that, they're capped out. They won't sign them up. So that's one reason why. I don't know. I mean, why is it January 26th, the deadline? Well, that's the internal deadline that they seem to be pushing. You could work back and say, okay, maybe their real goal they're setting is the human landing date for the Artemis, whatever it is. And working back from there, we got to get it going by this date. I doubt that's what they're doing. You could say, oh, it's the cash flows, right, of what they're spending. And we're working back so we don't have to do another raise. Oh, they are doing another raise. So I hear. Anyways. Oh, you want me to talk about the raise?
No, I've been seeing George nodding back and forth. So George, unmute yourself and jump in.
There's something else here too, right? So when you talk about the differences or other options that people who are building to these new specifications, right? Starships advertised diameters, 9 meters, right? Whereas New Glenn is 7, and that's probably like the next closest. So these aren't small design changes, right? I'm not going to, pretend to be an engineer here. I'm firmly an economist and a mathematician, but there's
that's
a big
the math. I mean,
not,
exactly two, right? So two matters.
Yeah. And I think that in terms of business case, I think to Chris's point, this also comes down to, people are building around putting the next generation of technology up and thinking that next generation technology can be of these larger form factors. And so if something pauses or gets delayed one place, it's going to affect other things down the chain, and there's going to be secondary and tertiary effects here.
All right. So moving on to the next big thing that I want to ask you guys about. I want to ask about the presidential budget request for financial year 2026 for the Space Force and how it may or may not affect the finance and investment into space companies, because it looks like the president and the administration have raised the U.S. Space Force budget from the enacted 2025 budget, which is $28.7 billion, to a grand total of $40 billion. But that's only because the funding has been bifurcated, right? It's on two tracks. One is the traditional track, a presidential budget request that eventually ends up becoming a national defense appropriations bill. The other, that's the one-time funding in the big, beautiful bill that was signed on July 4th. And in fact, 1/3 of the 2026 Space Force budget, so that's 1/3 of $40 billion, comes from the big, beautiful bill, which is a reconciliation bill, not normal business, and highly unlikely to happen again for this purpose. At least it's not supposed to work this way. And in fact, the Space Force's base discretionary budget has been cut by 8.35% before accounting for inflation. That means the real buying power in the base budget could be cut by as much as 11%. And we did speak about this last week in the last episode of the DownLink podcast with my budget gurus, Todd Harrison and Sam Wilson, because this is confusing. On the one hand, it looks like there's going to be a lot of money for 2026 for the Space Force, the biggest customers for all U.S. space companies. But maybe it's not for 2027, right? And Todd Harrison said last week on this podcast that this is a one-time sugar high. How does that affect investing or how entrepreneurs plan growth? Or are the primes the only ones that are positioned to take advantage of this and ride out the rest? It just, I've got to say, for me, from my little corner of the world, it just feels unsustainable. So yeah, I want your take.
Pop the champagne. Like I said, the stocks were up like 100 and some odd percent, like Crazyville. So everybody loves sugar. Why wouldn't we like it?
Yeah, 40B or 39.9 rounding top line, everyone loves it, right? The geeks were going to drill down into what it actually means and unfunded versus requested. I get it. Like, we'll all play games there. But I don't see how you put the cork back on the champagne that Chris just popped, right?
I want to go to Chris's party.
Once we're at 40B, we're going to stay there.
Yeah, really? Wow, I like that prediction. Can we mark that as your prediction for next year?
There we go. As of July, George said.
Yeah, you have to look no further back than the last war, right? The global war on terror, where I remember that very first year, they're like, oh, this is going to cost us $40 billion. How are we going to pay for this? And they're like, oh, let's do this supplemental thing. And then the supplemental, it became its own line item for a decade and a half.
Right. OCO funding. In fact, a line item that you really couldn't dig into because it just was this bucket, right?
Yeah.
And there's also a little bit here too about how, on one hand, we're talking about what's going on with the Space Force budget, but in another breath, we're talking about all this Golden Dome spending, and we're not really, I think, being holistic here, which is, there's a lot of folks in our industry who are going to benefit from both of these pools of cash. So we have lots of reason to pop multiple corks of champagne.
And just to take another look at what this reconciliation bill could mean, how it could affect venture capital and entrepreneurs, according to reporting and analysis that I read from PitchBook, there are some real positives here. Helpful changes in taxation policies, such as R&D deductions that should help startups, and investors can keep more of their capital gains and reap those rewards faster on exit. How will that help the space sector? I mean, it's got to sort of keep those champagne bottles popping open, right, and bubbling.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's helpful. I think what the most helpful thing is seeing, 2 successful space IPOs this year, with Carmen and Voyager. Even some of the, the past flops, are flying again. And so, it's success begets more investment. And I think that's actually the single thing we've got working, to the industry's benefit right now is we're on a winning streak. The Elon Musk thing again, I mean, it helped, it hurt, it's good, it's bad. it keeps slipping back and forth, but it's kind of a distraction. Overall, the trends that the administration has put in place, both domestically and, let's face it, internationally, like he has changed the defense policy of every country in the world. And, it is going to benefit the aerospace and defense sector. And I think to a large degree, the defense sector, the space sector, right, where we're seeing some unprecedented growth in big government contracts for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. I just saw Maxar announce like a couple $100 million worth of government contracts. Planet won a $240 million contract with Japan. There are, large government.
So you do know that there are some things missing from the NRO budget that affect Maxar and Earth observation companies.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I understand you're putting out the sugar, but there has been some sour too.
Oh yeah, there's a double-edged sword here.
But we should be clear here, though, that when we talk about customers, and these are folks in the space industry who have Uncle Sam as a customer, and the defense budget overall is something like 70, somewhere between 2/3 and 70% to primes. 15% of the money going out the door is going to R&D. Of a small fraction, something like 1 or 2% is going to some of the small and medium-sized companies in there. So they're winning too. All of these boats are rising when you see top line numbers like 40 billion or brand new programs like Golden Dome. All of these companies are winning because they're the ones providing the service that the government is saying it wants to buy, right? The government's saying, I'm a good customer here. I want to buy this. This is what it looks like for the next 2 years, next 3 years, next 5 years of a plan. And people are excited about it.
George, Chris, thank you both so much for your time.
Thanks,
Thank
Laura.
you. It was great being here.
Please invite me back, even if George can't come.
That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, listen to Cavis Ships with Chris Cavis and Chris Cervello. And get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.